So good afternoon, everyone, and very welcome to SEPS. I'm EuSocialCit, I'm the Director of Research, and I'm really pleased to open the event of today. So this is the EuSocialCit Policy Symposium. First of all, what is EuSocialCit? EuSocialCit is an Horizon 2020 project which is coming close to the end. And in the context of this research project, we have envisaged to have an exchange with policymakers to understand whether we can actually contribute to the policy agenda, in particular to the social policy agenda, but also to hear from the policymakers what is the current situation about social policies, in particular at European level, and what we can expect for the future. So what is in the agenda today is the future of European social rights, and a lot of the discussion will be on the European pillar of social rights. And in order to discuss the pillar, we have thought of having 3 different sessions. We will start with a keynote speech by Katarina Ivankovic-Ksenevich. Almost. She's the Director for Social Rights and Inclusion at DG Employment at the European Commission. We will then have a panel where the colleagues from the different partner institutions of the consortium will highlight some of our findings. And then we will have a policy panel with Frank van den Broek, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Social Affairs and Health here in Belgium. Agnes Jongerius is the member of the European Parliament, and Oliver Robke, who is the new president of the European Economic and Social Committee. So I hope you will find that the program interesting. I think it is very much. So with these words, I want to pass the floor to Martin Koene. He is the principal investigator of the EuSocialCit project. Martin, the floor is yours.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Martin Koene is my name. I won't bore you with a very long and detailed explanation what we've done in our research project, because that's probably not what you want to hear. I just want to say that we are a group of about 30 researchers working in 8 to 9 different countries. We've tried to cover quite a lot of areas that are covered by the Pillar of Social Rights. Trying to see what our colleagues at DG Employment and elsewhere are actually cooking up there, how this is working, how this is affecting the lives of our European citizens. So we do a lot of policy research. We do also a lot of research on the opinion of European citizens. What do they actually think about this? What are they looking for? What role do they actually see for the EU in terms of social policy? What kind of social policy? So we've been working now for about 3.5 years. We've, as good academics, we have compiled like a pile like this of research reports, academic publications, whatever you want. But at the same time, we don't want to and we cannot live in our ivory academic tower. So we try as much as we can to have exchanges like today, to talk to non-academics as well, to discuss about policy, to discuss about our findings, and to exchange what we know. And therefore, I think today is a very nice occasion, one of the many occasions within this project that we do this. Cinzia already gave you the program. We have, I think, a really good program, really good participation from our political colleagues. So I look forward to a nice exchange with you. I hope it will not be the last time that we talk, and we will be organizing more events. So we hope to see you more often. With that, I will give the floor, and I'll try to do it right now, to our first speaker, our keynote speaker, who is called Katarina Ivankovic-Ksenevich. Director of Social Rights and Inclusion at DG Employment. Katarina, the floor is yours.
Good. So good afternoon to all. Thank you for coming, and also thank you EuSocialCit for inviting me to give this keynote presentation and to share with you what has been happening, what is happening, and what is about to happen in the EU and in the area of social rights and social policy. So before going into anything that we have done, maybe I want to ask you a question. Do you know how we, the EU technocrats, call our European Pillar of Social Rights? It is our... Does anybody know the word that we often use all the time? You hear all the commissioners, everyone. We say often it's our compass. Compass. It's our, what else could it be? Guide. Yeah, it's our guide. And yeah, well, the Bible is a bit strong. maybe a bit going too far. I would, because we have many different Bibles, like our treaties, etc., like all the New Testaments and everything else that goes in between. Well, but to put the joke aside, the European Pillar of Social Rights indeed is, when we say compass, it is really a compass, because what is the pillar? It's a set of principles proclaimed 5 years ago in 2017 in Gothenburg. And this set of principles is guiding EU social policy since Gothenburg. But we can really, when you look at the developments in the social policy since early 2000 up to now, the pillar was just compiling what the main keys and principles were in the past and putting it in a super clear and clean narrative, I would dare to say, because for the policymakers it's always very important to have as clear as possible the narrative. But then when you might ask, like, if you have a set of principles as your social policy, is that a social policy? In order to implement the pillar, in 2021, we have adopted so-called action plan on the implementation of the Pillar of Social Rights. And those of you online, if there are such who have seen the action plan, it's really a set of measures and goals to be achieved and the objectives to be achieved in the area of social policy. What I can tell you, I believe there is 135 different actions, and us in DG Ample have undertaken already either adopted or are in the final stage of adoption of practically all of those measures and actions. But what is very important for the pillar is that it doesn't also say only measures and activities, it also sets targets. And we set targets for 3 objectives, and these targets are to be achieved until 2030, which gives the pillar and the action plan this long-term perspective, and which gives the member states also the time frame in which their policies needs to be adapted and adopted in accordance with the pillar principles. These 3 targets are 78% of people in employment by 2030, at least 60% of adults each year in some kind of educational activities, and 15 million people less in poverty, including at least 5 million children less. What is a great outcome of the discussion about the action plan and the Porto Summit, which was held in 2021, is that member states have committed in achieving these 3 targets. So each member state said how many people will be in employment, in the education, and how many people will be lifted out of the poverty. If we take all of their commitments, then we are pretty certain that we will reach 2030 targets. And especially when it comes to the poverty reduction, we are very happy that many member states committed also to lifting the children out of the poverty, which is an additional target. It's not, it's part of the 15 million, but member states were not obliged to commit on this target. So what we have done in the meantime, so 21 until now, what we have done, I will tell you, and I think I have 12 actions to mention. So first, and maybe one of the most important when it comes to the employment, is the adoption of the European Directive on Adequate Minimum Wages. And this directive sets the rules and the principles on setting the adequate minimum wages, while fully supporting the collective bargaining and full respect of the national traditions and autonomy of the social partners. Then one very important directive, especially for many women across the EU, is the Pay Transparency Directive. And pay transparency sets really key principles on effective enforcement of equal pay principle between women and men, which goes equal pay for equal work or the work of equal value. And it's up, of course, to the policymakers in individual member states to define what is the equal work of equal value. Then we have proposed, I say proposed, these two were adopted. We proposed the directive on improving working conditions of platform workers. You know that this is a new trend. It's quite evident that persons involved in the platform work have faced many challenges. Especially when it comes to the social protection of those, and special social protection, we could put it in correlation to the work that is affected by digitalization. And the good thing is that last week on the 12th of June, the EPSCO Council has reached a common position. So we had a general approach on the approach to take the following negotiations with the European Parliament. So in a month to come, hopefully before the end of mandate of this Parliament, we might see this very important directive to be adopted. Then what is there? The point 4 is reinforced youth guarantee, which has been backed up by super significant next generation EU funding and additional measures that go beyond employment and education, because young people face problems in finding housing, in organizing work-life balance, and many other aspects. Also, those living in poverty with impossibility to continue the studies, etc. Then the point 4 is the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities, 21-27, with 7 flagships, 64 actions. It's really a comprehensive document embracing all the articles of UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, having for the first time ever, I would say, at the EU level, a comprehensive and strategic planning how to support persons with disabilities across the EU. Then the 5th initiative, one that I have to say I'm extremely proud to be leading on the preparation and now the implementation, is the European Child Guarantee. And the European Child Guarantee, adopted already 2 years ago, we just celebrated the 2nd anniversary yesterday actually. We ask member states to secure the free and effective access for children in poverty or children in need to early childcare education and care education, health, and at least 1 healthy meal a day. And then we ask for the effective access when it comes to housing and nutrition. So all of these elements, and I will tell you later why all these elements are extremely important for the social Europe. Then also another initiative quite new under our European sky is the European Platform on Combating Homelessness, where in 2021, member states via Lisbon Declaration have confirmed the commitment to eradicate or work towards eradicating homelessness, which in principle would mean reducing substantially homelessness by 2030. And this platform has already proven its existence, because since that momentum, now 8 additional new member states have adopted the strategies to combat homelessness. And one might say it's a small step, but in terms that this wasn't topic that was immediately visible when reflecting on the social policy, we do consider huge success. Then another important initiative is an EU action plan to support social economy. This topic is particularly dear to our commissioner, because even before becoming commissioner, he was leading on the Luxembourg Declaration, long time ago, I believe in 2015 adopted, where the member states were committing to undertake various activities in the area of social economy, seeing as something that can help many to find their place at the open labor market, including many vulnerable groups, many persons with disabilities, and actually all of those who want to invest and reinvest in a different manner. So very, very important action plan. And on the 13th June, the Commission has adopted a proposal of the Council recommendation on developing social economy framework conditions, which will support member states in finding this framework and boosting the social economy. So my point 8 is, well, it's not single point because it has many initiatives relevant to skills. You might know the Council recommendation on ILA, Individual Learning Account, that has been in place now for almost 2 years. And this year, actually, from the 9th of May, has been declared as the European Year of Skills and serves as really addressing skills from various angles. From our own, let's say, DG employment views, but also from the views of each sector that requires additional skills, especially within the green and digital transition, and especially with finding the ways how to boost skills in that area for those who do require additional upskilling, reskilling. So in the area of social protection, which is the core of the social policy, I will just mention 3 elements, and then 4th element is something you know very well. The 3 elements are the adoption of the new Council recommendation on the minimum income in order to ensure active inclusion, based on 3 elements. One is adequacy of benefits, 2nd is access to labor market, and 3rd, access to services. And in our view, without these 3 elements working together, we are not going to lift minimum income beneficiaries ever from being such beneficiaries into the labor market or integrate in the community as they should be. And these 3 elements are key in order to achieve their better position in the society. Then a European care strategy, which is one strategy with 2 additional elements. So recommendation on the revision of the Barcelona targets. And some of you might know that Barcelona targets were designed in 2000s for inclusion in children in early childcare education and care. Certain percentage that had to be achieved. So now, after 20 years, we saw that it's time to revise. And the other aspect is the recommendation on affordable long-term care and accessible long-term care. So this already hints you that the care strategy takes care from the birth until the old age. And this life cycle approach is something that we have embraced a lot. And it's visible not only in these 2 elements, but also via many other policies. And then one very important initiative that was adopted last year, and which is, I believe, especially interesting for you researchers and academics, it's the guidance on distributional impact assessments. Because what we have seen is then when proposing a different, either legally binding or not legally binding documents and initiatives, many times policymakers lack the impact or how these policies will affect certain cohorts of the society. And here, in our case, we speak about those who are either at risk of poverty or social exclusion, or around the risk, or for various reasons belong to the different target groups, and impact of the reforms on their lives is probably much bigger than the general public. So this is why we have proposed this guidance. Many member states are already using various models and methods, but we give them points and we point them towards which methods might work better and where they should find additional support. And of course, we as a Commission are ready to support. And then something which I believe you are fully aware and is a Council recommendation on access to social protection, because we have been speaking a lot about this recommendation. It's also part of the pillar. It was adopted in 2019, and it has particular accent on the workers and the self-employed. And why I mention self-employed, because you know, according to the treaty, self-employed are not considered workers in our legal language, while we know that reality is very different and self-employed are becoming more and more visible in our labor markets. And something that I would also like to put in correlation, we have seen that during the COVID, many member states invested a lot and have put a lot of measures in motion that were also addressing the self-employed. So we saw it's doable, it's possible, and now we do believe that we need to step up efforts. So our future efforts will for sure go in the direction that we have more security for all types of employment, including these very flexible and also new forms of employment. So these are I would dare to say, the major policy initiatives. There are many others, but maybe for you and for today, for today's discussion, these are the most important. Let me just give you a little bit of the context in which the social policy has been in last 5 years. We call it that we have been constantly in perma-crisis mode, be it 2000 Great Recession 2009 to 12, then the refugee crisis in 2015, then the COVID in 2020, and now Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And we have been constantly dealing with some kind of crisis. And those of, especially the academic community, who was always, I would dare to say, much more talkative about factoring the crisis into our systems, have been right, actually, and have been right, maybe not exactly in what kind of crisis would occur, because I'm pretty sure that at the beginning of COVID, no one thought that the next big crisis will be war. And in this respect, we cannot really maybe assess what a future crisis will be, although we see the consequences from the war in the peaks of energy prices, which is leading to big social differences and additional crises, etc., etc. But we also see a big difference into addressing these crises. So the crisis 2008, which was largely, I would say, characterized by the huge austerity, closing individualizing countries, not having a clear policy guidance at EU level. And then we see that from the COVID crisis, we have really put in, at the EU level, we have really supported member states not only by the fast reactions in terms of policies and changing the laws, bylaws, etc. enormously, but we have also put and offered really unprecedented financial support to mitigate the crisis and to mitigate actually the economic and the social and the health impact of the COVID-19 and now what is happening with the war. And our instrument, which is called SURE, for short-term employment arrangements, has proven to be a good way forward. So if you allow me, I would say that we have learned something from dealing with a crisis, with the previous crisis towards this crisis, and this also has shown a way forward. So not only that putting additional money, but EU has drawn the lessons from the so-called double-dip recession, and we have decided to activate so-called general escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact, which actually allowed for the temporary departure from the normal operation of fiscal rules, and in this situation have secured that member states did not face additional problems when it comes to the debt and when it comes to their own budgets. And in conclusion, I would dare to say that we have really avoided a massive employment and social crisis across the EU, and this has been visible in all member states over the last 3 years. But I would also dare to say that there is no room for complacency of any kind, because if we listen to the recent Eurobarometer has said that a rising cost of living is the most pressing concern at around 9 from 10 on average in the EU. So We know where our further actions needs to be embedded, and we know what we need to do. And we also, with the uncertain outlook of ending the war in Ukraine, and which then overlaps into the uncertain economic outlook, we really have to continue to tackle very difficult aspects like inflation on households, and having especially in mind the vulnerable population, and putting it also in the perspective of the recent policy developments where Europe tends to be going towards what I already mentioned, digital and green. So what do we do and what do we need? We need definitely informed policy choices. We definitely need to take, and now at the end of every commission, there is a bit of time to reflect what has been done and what the gaps are and what is there to be done in order to really have a positive impact and the changes on the persons and individuals' lives. To just come back briefly for the recent Eurobarometer, in the majority of the participants, they favor additional spending on social policies. And could you guess where the majority of Europeans think that this additional funding should come from? No. They say, so the majority says that social policies should be financed by higher taxes. This is what the Europeans said. This is what the European population is saying. Expectations are also very visible on who should react. So 80% of Europeans say that their member state has to react. But also the same percentage, 80% of Europeans think, 70% I have to say, of Europeans thinks that EU needs to step up the efforts and help and assist member states in doing so. So these are, I believe, quite interesting figures. We also know that we are swimming in a quite interesting competence framework, because majority of the social competencies is in the hands of member states, and the EU role, since open method of coordination put in place long time ago, is quite limited in some sectors. But this also shows that the EU is more and more visible as those who can influence the social policies and who should step up the efforts in influencing the social policies. So I would say that what we get from the citizens is the call for stronger action, including also the EU level, further reducing inequalities, and fostering and empowering society and economy. So this could be in a way how we read the Eurobarometer. Martin, how many minutes do I have?
Well, you can have another 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Yes, well, you are very fortunate that you will have some of the speakers after me later, which will be able to go much more into the details of what should be done and how to do it. But let me tell you just a few things. First, in order to think about the future, we have already 2 years ago established a high-level group for the future of social protection and the welfare state. Please go online and read the recommendations of this high-level group. They start, they have 21 recommendations. Each is super rich in terms that they say what needs to be done, but also how. And you can read between the lines. It's very easy. Starting strong from early age, and this is the key. Social investments needs to start at an early age, as early as possible, especially paying attention to those living in poverty. Then they move towards the pensions and everything in between, so you will be able to read it. What we in the social policy and the social rights consider extremely important is that social investments are key in empowering and supporting persons in Europe. Social investment, you will see that the high-level group has an interesting recommendation on the golden rule towards the social investments. Lots of discussion over the years about the golden rule, and I'm pretty sure in years to come there will be plenty of the discussions, and we'll see if we ever get there and how we get there. One very important aspect that is ongoing now, and the discussion that is ongoing, is about the need to strengthen the EU governance when it comes to the social policy, so-called social convergence framework. Last week, the ministers have discussed about this framework. Belgium and Spain are behind the proposals on the framework, so Minister Van den Broeke for sure is going to go there, and he will tell you what happened last week in the EBSCO. But it is very important then, whenever rethinking European semester, microeconomic rules and tools and the governance, not to forget the social dimension. And this framework is one of the ways forward, where the social would be visible and taken on board when reflecting on the other aspects. So I would close here, and I'm available for some questions, Martin, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, questions to Katarina? Yes, go ahead.
May I speak without microphone?
Because we have online participants.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
Thanks. My name is Roland Kulke. I work here for Transform Europe. Just two questions I noted, and now I'm very happy that you mentioned at the very end, we should not forget it in the European semester. I would like to get some more information on this, how strongly it is included or not. And the other question is, because we start thinking of this also, how to say, as working on this in a long-term way, you mentioned the importance of affordable long-term care and the strategy. What I have heard more often now is that we see the ongoing financialization of this sector. So basically, after the housing sector has been taken over by money which wasn't spent due to quantitative easing or whatever, now it's another sector. So how can we work on this danger that basically you do have a strategy, but it's maybe counteracted by this investment strategy, so to say? Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Do we take another question, or I reply? Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Hello. I'm just wondering how you're thinking about the fact that there are going to be the EU elections coming up, and there might be a change of guard, if that factors in at all into your discussions.
Anybody else? Sorry, first and then you go.
Very brief. Only one reference to the European semester, like the colleague before, Volker Schmidt, European representatives of the Social Security Associations of Germany. In the country-specific recommendations, the effect of the European Pillar of Social Rights was relatively weak this year. I fully support all the arguments that it was a major step forward, but until now, in the pillar is not really representative or really well represented in the European semester at the end, when it really comes heart-to-heart in front of the member states. Would be nice to have a certain reaction, because you have probably a different position as colleagues for ECFIN.
Okay, one last question for this round, and then you can pick and choose what you...
It's just, is it working?
Yeah. Yes.
It's just something very practical. The commune of Ixelles is renovating lots of buildings. And you talk about social protection, minimum wages and all that. And the responsible of the group of people working in front of my house, he came to me and he talked to me. He said, you know, we have constraints. We wanted to do the work within 3 years. Now we have to do it within 2 years. So what do? Here, minimum wage is 15 euro per hour. So now what we engage 3 people at 5 euro per hour, and the work will be done within 2 years. Okay, so. And who takes care of social protection of those workers, most of them coming from Romania or Bulgaria.
Katarina.
Yes, thanks a lot. So regarding semester, I would say since COVID, so since 2020, we have a bit of hybrid semester. Not the semester as we used to know, which follows all the principles, etc., or all the area of activities and were included. So since 2020, which meaning 2021, 22, have been mainly focusing on health, on prevention, on investments in the area, in those two areas. And then I would say this year we are coming back to normal, but not really, because also semester did not fully focus on all the aspects that we used to know in the past, and much less space was left for consolidating national budgets and putting it in a bit different perspective. And yes, you are right, you could see it from the CSRs, that the number of country-specific recommendations in the social area which was much lower than in the past. But this also motivated us in social policy arena to rethink how we could shape the new semester and how we can help that the social remains really crucial. In the processes, in the follow-up of the semester remain the same when it comes to the social policy. So we had our discussions in the employment committee, we had our discussion in the social protection committee, we have reflected on all the different aspects. Our services have prepared the country fishes for each country following the pillar principles, the social scoreboard and the revised social scoreboard, and even the secondary targets, which we all know that they are not fully agreed or will be agreed sometime soon. But we did follow it, and we are fully aware what is happening in the member states. And now with the social convergence framework is also our additional push to have clear place in the semester process. And I'm pretty sure that within, well, next year maybe already, but for sure within the new commission, the revised semester will have a bit different design than we see now, and I would still take this year as transitory. So in this respect, we could see a bit difference than if we compare it to 2019 or the years before. Also one important aspect is that we should avoid that semester just becomes an administrative burden and that there is a lot of administration without real impact. And we could question if the annual approach was always the best approach, especially for some reforms that do require additional period and that are not feasible within a year perspective. So I think this also will influence the semester in the future. On the long-term care, very important question and very important concern, because we have seen it during the preparation of the care strategy and the recommendation. And that's why we have something extremely important, which is called Annex 1, and it's the only annex to the long-term care recommendation, which speaks about quality principles. And these quality principles are to be respected fully by variety of different settings in the long-term care, be it institutional settings, residential, nursery, whatever we can imagine, including community-based care. And these quality principles, they go from the full respect to independent living, to having the quality principles related to carers, to those to whom care is provided, and you can really follow very, very closely what needs to be respected in the area of long-term care. Then on the EU elections, well, I wish I had a crystal ball and I could predict. We have seen in the recent few elections in which direction they are going in individual member states. I don't know if this would be the pattern for the whole Europe, and I'm pretty sure that now quite soon we will have a Spanish elections, we will have a Belgium elections next year, early next year, the Greek, etc., etc. So we will see a bit where the member states' pulse, I would dare to say, in terms of elections is. And also then whenever you have a new commission, you have a bit of design and new design invested, created, etc. What I truly hope and wish that no one would question the European Pillar of Social Rights. And I do hope that by not only our actions, but also the actions of the stakeholders, it is quite visible. Also, I don't think that ever in the social policy area we had such a crystal set of values, because the 20 principles are European values, what needs to be done in respect to the different policy areas. And this will remain. What we can think about is, like, do we need a comprehensive strategy or strategic framework to combat poverty? Do we need some other elements that could be put in place? Is the action plan considered sufficiently as a strategic framework? So these elements, which I believe will be discussed in the future. And on your question, I'm really sorry, but it's very difficult to reply without having full picture and what is happening. But I would dare to say, by adopting the directive on the minimum wage, we have pushed some member states quite a lot into increasing the adequacy of the minimum wage and into putting full social protection there. What still needs to be done is really in the area of self-employed, and not only in relation to platform work, but in general the self-employed as emerging trend, I would say, within the many member states. But decent living conditions should be the minimum, bare minimum for the workers in any country, and this is what I believe is also the essence of the European Union rules and principles.
Thank you, Katarina. We still have a few questions, space for a few questions. Cynthia?
Katarina, you mentioned that social investment are key in supporting citizens' empowerment. I cannot agree more, because in the project we had a full chapter which is called this way. So, but just a reflection on a finding that we have. So we'll be looking at the evolution of the social agenda and social investment within the social agenda since the late 90s, and even mapping. I'm looking at my colleagues, we have done the work together. Basically all the EU legislative provisions and even case law to see what is the role of the EU when it comes to social investment. And what we find is that actually this is quite limited, because most of the competencies are basically national. So this is a call for action at the level of the member states. However, we are also putting forward a bit of a different view by looking at the RRF. And basically, maybe we should go beyond what we call normative resources and practice pieces of legislations, and other ways through which the EU helps to achieve certain social targets, and for instance, social investment. So I would like to hear from you whether you share this view, whether there is similar kind of thinking. Or thank you.
Any other questions? You're very welcome. We still have a few minutes, so.
Well, I can start replying, and then maybe someone might get motivation or something. So I have to say we do share the view. We see also social investments as a key in not only providing adequate social services of any kind, but also having this leverage between what is needed and what is done, and also taking account for and really paying attention to the vulnerable groups of our society. And this is how we see it. Where we see the most urgent need in the area of social investment, it's for sure, it's threefold. It's really the early childcare education and care, and long-term care for sure. The healthcare, which has become even more important during the COVID crisis and the COVID time. And what we see is many member states that are undertaking many reforms when it comes to the healthcare, many reforms also when it comes to the integrated services. But this is so difficult to be achieved that just this Monday, we had the first meeting of the long-term care coordinators that member states appointed upon our recommendation. And I can tell you, out of 27, probably 15 of them said that they are struggling with integrated care. And this is not only because they don't want to do something, but because it's a complex, and you always have a health systems and you always have a social systems, which in the past did not work together. And this is, I believe, one of the biggest problems that we as Europe face, where we have not only in terms of the competencies at EU and national levels, but in the member states, the difference in competencies when it comes to the national, local and regional, and even at the national when it comes to the different services. And while in the past it was more fight between, let's say, education and labor, now the health is in and many other stakeholders, not to mention housing. We are not even touching upon housing and who is in charge, and what about social housing and the capacities of social housing. So these are all the elements. So if you ask me, the future is definitely in social investments. How to address the social investments in the microeconomic picture and the governance systems is another issue. And I'm pretty sure that we could have very different views if you ask my colleagues from another institutions and if you ask us from the social policy field. But we need to find some common ground in order to move forward. And also, social investments mean not only investments in the buildings and not only investments as such, but making sure that you have sufficient workforce to fill in services. And this is something that it's very often forgotten or very often put in the domain, okay, it's member states will take care of it, and how they will take care of it. In terms of RRF, I do believe that the future generation of EU funding, which will be after 28, because we are now 21st, 27, we'll have lots of reforms in this respect. For years, we have been speaking about simplifying processes. Simplification is such a huge investment that sometimes you question the result. Many times you question the result. But I do believe that the future needs to be much more freedom and clarity for different investments, and truly hope that social investments will be the core when it comes to the social policy. So not only like 25% of this or 10% or 5%, I think we would have to see the whole picture, and that would be the only way forward, and huge interaction between different services and policy areas. I really do believe that we cannot say that how are we going to address like pension gap. Do you address pension gap when a person is 65? No. You do it when the person has children, when she or he, mostly she, has to take care of dependent members of household, etc. You don't resolve the issue when person is retiring. So the whole picture will really, all the dots will have to be connected. And it's very simple to say, very difficult to achieve.
Well, I think that's a good way to close this session. Thank you very much again, Katarina, for your speech and for your elaborate answers. Applause for Katarina.
Thank you.
And then we move on to the next session of our event, and I think I give the mic to Francesco here. Which one do you want? You want to?
But you stay on the floor, so on the stage.
No, no,
Is Maurizio connected Maurizio?
Yes.
Okay. Ciao Maurizio.
Here.
Okay, you can hear us, right?
Yes, sure.
So the next section has three panelists. Maurizio, I have to say that it's a very big pity that you are not here with us, but it's very good that you could make it nonetheless. So Maurizio Ferreira is a professor of political science at the University of Milan, director of the PhD program NASP, where I also had the pleasure to do my PhD. And then together with Maurizio, we have Martin Keune, professor at the University of Amsterdam. And then we have Jolanta. Yes, there, okay. From Vilnius University and Lithuanian Research Center for Social Policy Research. So this session will be dedicated to present the findings of the EuSocialCit project. We will start from the presentation by Maurizio, who will illustrate the power resources conceptual framework that is the basis and I would say one of the key innovations of the EuSocialCit project. So then it will be followed by Martin and then by Jolanta. So I would, without further delay, I would like to give the floor to Maurizio for his presentation.
Thank you, Francesco. I am really sorry that I cannot be there with you in person. I had a family emergency that prevented me from coming to Brussels, but I hope I can make up with this presentation. Now, I am going to present you the conception that our project has elaborated on the nature and possible future of European social citizenship. And I will start with okay. Do I have to, do you see or?
Yes, we see it perfectly. Maybe you can make it exactly. That's best.
Okay, we started from the idea that the European Union is a compound polity, possibly and hopefully a union in the making of nation-based welfare states, whose key foundation remains social citizenship in its Marshallian conception, the conception that was elaborated by T.H. Marshall back in the 50s. That is to say, social citizenship as a set of subjective and legally enforceable rights of social protection. Now, in addition or alongside national social citizenship rights, over time, the EU has become increasingly active in the production of complements. For example, and initially cross-border rights, the so-called regime for the coordination of national social security systems. It has accumulated a social acquis of binding and also soft regulations and directives, and it has established and then expanded funds in order to support domestic social policies. Now, we think that more can be done, of course, also in terms of binding legislation, but the EU will not be able to turn into a federal welfare state of the same type that we see in countries such as the US or Switzerland, because of the fact that there are already robust and extended national welfare states, precisely. But from the experience of the historical federations, the EU can learn an important lesson, namely that of organizing social citizenship as a marble cake. And I use here a nice metaphor that was coined a couple of decades ago by some US scholars. That is to say, a construct, an institutional construct, which results from the contribution of different levels of governments in providing distinctive resources. Now, the picture in this slide summarizes the American situation. Here you have two separate levels, the federal and the state levels, each one endowed with its own direct political legitimation, so two separate layers. The federal layer runs important nationwide social insurance program in the field of healthcare and pensions, for example. The states run and fund a host of social assistance programs, and the federal government co-funds both unemployment benefits and Medicaid benefits, which are, however, run from or at the state level. Now, in the United States system, Medicare and Social Security are very big programs. They are called, the federal social protection elephants, because they have an extensive impact on people's life chances and social protection. This will not be possible to replicate in the European Union. And so the European Union marble cake will have distinctive feature. Actually, we can say that it already has distinctive features because we already have a marble cake. We need to visualize it more clearly, and we have to make it more coherent, but we already have it. Now, what are the distinctive features? First of all, we do not have two entirely separate levels. The member states remain the key arenas and the key actors for the production of and the guarantee and the funding of social rights. I mentioned the social acquis, but even when the EU adopts binding legislation, such legislation still has to be transposed by the member states. And then there is an overall framework of common norms and principles, and then a number of smaller scale programs providing resources, EU funds, or promoting and partly funding like trans-border schemes or the coordination regime that I just mentioned. But let me be more specific and illustrate to you the way in which we conceptualize the marble cake, with a view also to then using this notion for identifying an agenda for the future. On the left-hand side, the ovals are the counterparts of the two layers of the US, except that in the EU, the two layers, I have put here also the regional level. In any case, the levels are not as clearly separate as in the US, because the member states are fully integrated in the EU policy-making, decision-making process. So if you wish, the EU is a marble cake all the way up, because the member states are also key actors at the center, much more than it is the case with the American states or the Swiss cantons. And most of what, the policies, the measures which are produced by this nested institutional architecture combines, most of the time, the intervention of both levels. If you, in order to understand and capture fully the nature of the marble cake in terms of its content, on the right-hand side of the slide, I have unpacked the resources which are necessary for the function of social rights, of social citizenship. Let's start with the resources which are necessary, important on the supply side. Well, first of all, we need what we call deontic resources, essentially principles, norms, justifications for introducing a certain social right. And as the presentation of the previous speaker has made it clear, now the Bible, the big compass, is the European pillar, which is a very important deontic resource, is a set of principles. A set of principles that, however, calls for the introduction of a more important type of resources, legal resources. Resources which are produced by legislative acts. In this case, the EU can intervene essentially by means of directives and regulation. But what matters, in addition to legal resources, is the production of an output. Because legal resources are those resources that define who is entitled to what. And the what needs to be produced, be it a pension or a social service. So production resources, material resources, need to be mobilized, for example, and primarily in the guise of funds. And here again, like I said before, the European Union steps in also by putting funds on the table, and recently with the RFF, it has put a lot of funds on the table, also for the field, the domain of social protection. Now, once there is the output, the most important moment is the access on the side of eligible citizens. Eligible citizens are defined by laws, by legal resources, but what matters is not just that they have the potential entitlement to be protected, but it's the actual and concrete possibility that they have to access the output, to enjoy and consume the output, to actually get a pension, to receive the service. And the access is not something that can be taken for granted, as attested by the very high rates of non-take-up, especially as regards certain benefits, for example, in the field of social assistance, which is documented by a wealth of empirical researchers. So if access cannot be taken for granted, then we have to focus and pay attention to what we call in our conception instrumental resources. That is to say, resources which facilitate access by providing information, by raising awareness, or by mediating between potential users and the actual outputs. I won't say more on this because I know that my colleague Martin Köhne will focus his presentation a lot on instrumental resources. And then there is the backing, ultimately, of enforcement resources, which allow citizens to obtain, a remedy in case things do not function as they are supposed to function. And as you see, all these resources, which are all necessary for securing access to the outputs on which final social outcomes depend, are the joint result of a co-production process in which the member states still play the key role, but they are, and they have been increasingly through time, underpinned and supported and accompanied by European Union measures. Now, as I said, this metaphor of the marble cake has not only an analytical function, but can be mobilized and exploited in order to identify and outline a possible agenda for the further development of social rights and for the full implementation of the pillar. The previous presentation mentioned a very important action plan comprising more than 100 measures that the Commission has already largely realized, implemented for bringing the 20 principles to actual fruition, but much more needs to be done. The 137 measures have focused on certain pillars more than they have on others. For example, there's not much on housing, there's not much on unemployment, especially now that the SURE program has expired. So the marble cake allows us or pushes us to pay a lot of attention to outputs and to outcomes, because after all, this is what we are interested in. We want to promote actual life chances of European citizens that we capture by measuring outcomes. So on the supply side, the agenda is, first of all, to identify and to reason even more than we have done so far about what are the desirable outcomes, which are also appropriate for the EU to focus on, and then ensure the provision of outputs. Certainly, this implies the adoption of legal measures. So we are not, downplaying the role of binding measures of hard law, but we think that a lot of other measures can play an equally important role. So if the attention must shift towards outcomes, then we need to identify outcome priorities and outcome indicators. We already have some, but we need more, so that we can establish, we can adopt, maybe in a binding form, common standards of service. Then we have to, or the European Union has to make sure that outputs are actually produced. And here, with the RFF, as you know, a new instrument, relatively new instrument, has been experimented with, performance-based social conditionality. And if we look at the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, we see that a lot of them include the introduction of new social rights, which are in line with the 20 principles, because there was conditionality linked to the 20 principles in the preparation of the national plans. We need more earmarked funds. And here I wonder, this is a question that I wanted to raise to the previous speaker, what is going to happen with SURE, the fund that was so successful during the pandemic, which was terminated in December. In Porto last year, a lot of discussion took place about the transformation of SURE into a fully fledged and permanent unemployment reinsurance system. Is this going to happen or not? On the demand side, in addition to legal resources, attention must be paid to the establishment of effective infrastructures underpinning access and neutralizing the problem of non-take-up. And this can be possibly done through the strengthening of existing EU dedicated social bodies. Here I mention equality bodies at the national level, the European Labour Authority, or the Ombudsman, that according to our findings can play or does already play a role in making sure that there is access and that there is the actual implementation of EU and national social laws. Now, as I said, the marble cake is already there, but we think that by visualizing it analytically, understanding how and in what way its various pieces can be put together, and constructing, building a rich agenda around all the pieces is going to be a promising strategy to further the set of measures that can strengthen for the future the European Union social citizenship, again, as a marble cake. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurizio. So I invite on the stage Jolanta and Martin both together so that we stay at the stage and I'm not alone. So I think that, I mean, I'm particularly fascinated also for personal reason by the framework that Maurizio has illustrated, because the right-based approach from a multi-level perspective, I think, allows to really grasp the citizen's perspective on social Europe. So the question is really, how am I empowered by the action that the EU put in place from an individual perspective, and what is the contribution from a multi-level perspective, considering that welfare states are obviously sovereign, that I can gain and being part of a broader community. And Maurizio stressed obviously one of the key innovation of the power resources framework, which is the instrumental resources, so what he called the demand side. So once there is a right, how can I as a citizen actually claim this right and get access to this right? And he mentioned a couple of initiatives at the EU level, which I would like just to remark. The first one is the European Labour Authority, which is indeed one of the key innovations, and one of the core pillar of the European Labour Authority indeed is access to information for mobile workers. And the other one is the quality bodies that have been recently, the directive revisited at the EU level. Martin Koenen, professor at the University of Amsterdam of Social Security and Industrial Relations, PI of the EuSocialCit project, will focus exactly on this latest aspect that I would say is under-researched so far. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. So if, yes, look at this, yes, it actually works. So yes, I will follow up on the presentation by Maurizio by talking to more about instrumental resources, as we call them. I titled my presentation, "Having a Right is Not Enough, Facilitating Access to Social Rights." So, sorry. The first speaker today, Katarina, gave us a very good, I think, overview of what is happening with social policy at the EU level. I think this is a really exciting time. Contrary to previous periods, this is a period where social policy is actually developing enormously, rapidly, broadly. And I think that is in itself a good development. However, what I would like to highlight in this presentation is that having a right, creating laws, creating eligibility for citizens is not enough. We see, as was already said before, that there are very high levels of non-take-up of all kinds of social rights. Eurofound put out a publication a few years ago where they said that it was between 20 to sometimes 70% of potential beneficiaries of a right, of a social benefit, didn't actually not get them, which is of course a very serious problem. And we see here that there are also serious differences between countries and between socioeconomic groups. So I will say more about that in a moment. To capture this issue and to be able to deal with it, we propose to look at a right not as one thing, but to look at a right as being composed of three elements, of three what we call power resources. So a right, first of all, has to give a normative dimension. The normative dimension being who has a right to what? What is your right? When do you have, for example, a right to unemployment benefits? How many euros should unemployment benefits be? And which characteristics define the citizen that actually should get an unemployment benefit? But we can also think about social housing, or we can think about active labor market policies. We can think about social protection type of measures. In all, it all starts with defining who has a right to what. Now, if we know who has a right to what, we also have to know what if this person doesn't get her right, where can she go? Can she go to a judge, to a court, to get the right when she doesn't get it as it should be? We call that enforcement resources. So how to enforce your right if you don't get it. Now, the third type of resources is where I will focus on, is what we then call instrumental resources. And that's, those are the means that are offered to help individuals to actually access a right that they have, to actually get it in practice. And not only have an entitlement, you worked so long, so many years, you paid so much contribution, now you have a right, but also actually then get it on your bank account or get your training course or whatever it is that you have a right to. Now, why is this so important? First of all, it's important that people get the rights that they actually have. A right should not only be a word, it should not only be a statement, but should be translated into practice. Second, we also think that it's a key issue in explaining inequality and unequal access of different groups or different countries to certain benefits. Now, what are these instrumental resources then exactly? We call them all the means and channels that make social rights accessible to citizens and that help transforming having a right into getting the respective benefit or service. And as you can see in the picture there, sometimes the world of benefits is kind of a maze. Instrumental resources should be the resources that help the citizens navigate this maze, to navigate the system of benefits. First of all, to become aware that a person actually has a right. You have to know it before you can apply for it, before you can get it. Second, helping persons in making claims. How do you actually apply for a right? Third, accessing the right in practice. And fourth, dealing with possible conflicts in this whole process, in dealing with problems that you can encounter in this process. To look at it in a little more detail, you know that we academics, we like tables with a lot of words and categories in there. So here you have one. I do only one today. So you can see in the top, we have these different stages that I just mentioned, being aware of a right, making a claim, accessing it, and problem solving. And then vertically, you can see what instrumental resources could actually be. And if you look, for example, at awareness, you can think of awareness can come from the provision of general information through websites or web portals. It can come from providing personalized information. And you may all have your own personal pension tracking tool, for example, where you can see what your pension rights are. These are sort of kind of passive types of providing information. We also have more active ones like awareness raising campaigns, which are broad, or more targeted outreach activities, which are more to specific groups. So making groups aware that they have rights is a very important activity. Similarly, we can look at claim making procedure. How do people actually get their rights? Of course, in the best of worlds, you automatically get your right. For example, in my country, the Netherlands, just the state pension you get automatically. You don't have to do anything for it. You don't have to apply for it. It's a thing that just happens and you get it. But that's also one of the very few rights that work so easily and so simple. Most of them actually require all kind of applications, all kind of procedures, forms, web pages, etc. You all have had the experience, surely, of navigating these kind of systems. They can be terrible. So good, positive instrumental resources make this easier, make the application procedure easier, make sure that there are one-stop contacts, one-stop offices, that you can do all the application in one particular place, etc., etc. Well, we can go on into more detail on also accessing the right or problem solving, but I guess the main point that has to be made is that if you have a right, with the right, you should also get these kind of resources to actually transform your right into reality. Now, what have we found in our research on all this? First of all, and very simple, and I would of course not do this presentation if we wouldn't have found this outcome, is instrumental resources really matter. So we've seen all kind of situations for all types of benefits, all kind of countries or situations where the having or not having of these instrumental resources made a difference. It made a difference in people getting their benefits, in knowing about our benefits. It make also the difference in the end, in what does the society look like. There where you have more instrumental resources, more people get their rights. If more people get their rights, there will be less people living in poverty, for example. There will be less people living without housing. There will be more people involved in training courses, etc., because they actually get access to their rights. Now, secondly, instrumental resources matter more for some than for others. So the capacity to navigate let's say, the social policy system, the social benefits or social services system is very important. And those who have less cognitive skills, digital skills, other skills important for navigating this system, they have less access. And so we often think of older people, for example, people with more practical types of education, that really find it difficult to navigate these kind of systems. Now, I have myself navigated benefit systems of different kinds several times, and I always think like, I am really, really bad at it. So for me, it's a nightmare to do, go through all these forms, especially when they're online. Somehow it makes me very nervous. My wife gets very nervous when I get very nervous about this. But I also always think like, and what do you do if you don't have, I have reasonable digital skills, I have reasonable cognitive skills. What do you do if you don't have them? Who helps you to navigate this system? Or rather, why don't we make this system easier? Because it's making the life of many people very, very complicated. So they matter more for some than for others. That is, I think, very important. And therefore, they also explain differences in take-up between groups. Those that navigate better get more benefits than those that navigate worse. And those that navigate better are normally the ones that already have more. So this can sort of emphasize any existing inequalities. And we also see that it may make a difference between countries. If country X and country Y have the same entitlement for citizens to certain benefits, but country X has very good instrumental resources and country Y does not, then you will get a difference between the two countries in the number of or percentage of people that actually have access to a benefit. Now, one of our research groups looked at these issues related to the work-life balance directive, very fresh. They looked at how this is implemented in a lot of member states. And here I have some of the conclusions of this group that sort of illustrate what I just said. First of all, the first conclusion is you need normative rights. So you need the legal right to good earmark level rights with high level of remuneration to get fathers to care for their children. If you want fathers to leave their work for several months and care for the children, then this only works if they have a reasonable right to a replacement income. However, this is not enough. So you need this as a condition, but it's not a sufficient condition for getting fathers involved in caring. So what did they find then? In several countries, the information about parental leave is really bad, is really confusing, uses different terms at different moments, confusing the applicant in can I or can I not apply. Procedures are often very complex. And as an example, there was a case where in one page you had to apply for the benefits, and the other page you had to apply for the leave, while it was about the same parental leave scheme. So that makes it all very complicated. Also, they found that HR departments and trade union representatives are very underused in communicating to working people about the rights that they have. They are very close to working people, but they are not used in this sense. And finally, in some countries like Denmark and the Netherlands, the government has developed, often together with other organizations like unions and NGOs, brought instruments for developing access, to granting access, to helping people to get their benefit, while other countries like Poland and Germany do not. Now, this is first of all unfortunate for people in Poland and Germany, but it also sort of stands in the way of the whole idea of a directive that is supposed to create upward social convergence. And if it is implemented in such a diverse way, then it's most likely that the differences between countries like Denmark and the Netherlands on one hand and Germany and Poland on the other one only get bigger, and that the upward convergence that we would like to see will not happen. Now, a third finding that I think is very important is it's not only the specific instruments that we offer to give citizens access, it's also the more macro conditions in which they live. And there we have two sort of dimensions of this. One is, in a very broad sense, we can see that countries where the quality of democratic representation is better, where the rule of law is better respected, where there's a tradition of information transparency, where we have substantial labor rights and gender empowerment, these are also the countries where benefits are more easily accessed. So that these sort of general conditions matter. And then secondly, also the availability of social actors that actually help people in the broad sense, maybe not for one specific benefit, but we think of NGOs, there must be a few in the room here, trade unions that are actually involved in producing these kind of instrumental resources, actually in providing information, raising awareness, giving assistance, etc. So countries with more dense, let's say, civil organizations, or a higher civil organization density would also be countries where we see that the access to benefits is easier. Now, one brief word then on the EU and instrumental resources. When you think of instrumental resources, we first of all always think of national resources, national policies, but the EU does quite a few things as well. We can see that it has a number of agencies that provide information or that provide certain types of assistance, as Francesco already mentioned. The EU also provides a lot of funding for civil organizations and stakeholders like the ETUC or the European Anti-Poverty Network and other of this type of organizations. The EU has made sure that in the member states we have equality bodies that can play a role here. The child guarantee, already mentioned by Katarina in her speech, also can be seen as part of instrumental resources. And finally, we see more and more that in directives and recommendations, there is space for instrumental resources. So in the recommendation on the access of social protection, for example, there's quite a lot of attention to transparency. Transparency is very close to what we call instrumental resources, where the EU recommends the member states to produce that kind of instruments. Also, if we look at the work-life balance directive, similarly, you see that the member states are encouraged to provide information, to do awareness campaigns, etc. Maybe the downside or what is lacking there is that it's rather voluntaristic. It's about recommendations, it's about encouraging, but it's not so much about making sure that these kind of instrumental resources are actually produced. Then to close, what can we learn from this? So I think the first thing that we can learn is that having a right is not enough. So a right has to be complemented by assistance, instruments that help you to actually access the right. And the lack of these kind of instrumental resources helps us to understand differences between social groups in access to benefits and also differences between countries. Secondly, I would argue that it would be very beneficial to explicitly and consistently consider instrumental resources as part and parcel of a right. A right without instrumental resources is a weak right, because it's a right that has no guarantee of being delivered in practice to the right holders. And finally, the third conclusion I would say is it is good for the let's say for the improvement of the take-up of our social rights to foster broader conditions that help citizens get access to their rights. And then especially I think having networks of NGOs and trade unions that are involved in this kind of activities, this will be very instrumental. So having a right is not enough. We need more than that. And that is my main conclusion of today. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Martin. And now it's Jolanta Edukaite, who is indeed the chief researcher at the Institute of Sociology and the Lithuanian Center for Social Policy. Jolanta has worked extensively on housing in Working Package 5 of the EuSocialCit project, with a very interesting paper which indeed focuses on housing rights and the development in Europe across member states, but also the role that the EU can have. In that, the conclusion, I have to say, are less positive or maybe as expected, but points, I think, in my view, to a direction that there is a little bit of decreasing trends in terms of housing provision across member states, and that the role of the EU is actually quite little. So I hope from this presentation you will actually present us your finding and also your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Jolanta Edukaite, and today I'm going to speak about very important social rights, and I would say quite neglected social rights. This is a right to housing. And I start my presentation emphasizing about importance of housing in our life. So this is a permanent need. We need, and this is basic human need, we need housing from the cradle to the grave. And adequate, affordable housing is an important determinant of one's well-being, health, as well as financial and family stability. However, what's happening in recent years, the access to affordable and adequate housing is deteriorated, and especially for low-income families, but also for middle-income families, it's becoming also a problem to attain adequate and affordable housing. And we see also homelessness on the rise in Europe. So in most EU member states, housing prices are growing faster than income, and it is found that income inequality and housing inequality is mutually reinforcing. And in many countries, people spend increasingly more on housing, and other costs are stable or falling. And this is why affordable and adequate housing has become a very important question on the EU's urban agenda, and EU seeks to address housing in the European Pillar of Social Rights. Housing is very important social rights, but it's also very special social rights. That means that this is not only part of a welfare state, but this is also part of a market. And housing is considered to be an investment, an asset, and characterized by very high capital intensity. And as I already mentioned, we need housing all the time, and it differs very much from other welfare state services or benefits, which we need only for at a certain stage of our life, like for instance, childcare or pensions. But housing we need all the time, and housing is never for free, only in some cases of a refugee situation, but even in the case of social housing, families or individuals, they still have to pay for housing. So since housing is also a part of a market, we need housing policy to correct market influence on housing sector, and also to help vulnerable individuals and families to obtain adequate and affordable housing. So housing policy is defined as government's intervention in housing field, and this is through legislation, practice in order to modify market forces by affecting the choices of household while achieving social objectives. And these objectives can be various, such as increasing housing affordability, increasing availability of social housing, reducing homelessness, ensuring the high quality of homes, and also sustainable and environmentally friendly houses with energy efficiency. The objective can also be to promote home ownership, which can be promoted directly or indirectly through various state regulations, credits, and loans. So having emphasized the importance of housing and how it is defined, I would like now to tell why I'm here and what is the purpose of my presentation. And I aim today to discuss the state of the housing rights across EU countries and the current role of EU in implementing these housing rights. And I will do it by trying to answer 3 questions. Is there convergence or divergence in housing policy solutions and outcomes in Europe? How does the welfare state typology reflect in housing policies? And what kind of role should EU take in housing policies? Is there convergence or divergence in housing policies and solution outcomes in Europe? So our results show that in general, housing policy decisions and outcomes shifted towards greater convergence in the EU member states. Over the past decades, however, trajectory is not very optimistic. We see that government expenditure on housing-related policies is declining, and the sector's performance in ensuring housing availability, affordability, and adequacy is not improving, and in some cases even deteriorating. And I would like to illustrate the situation Here we see government expenditures on housing and community amenities, and you see what we see decline or just a stable line for many countries. And the highest decline we see in Croatia, Cyprus, Romania, Bulgaria, and France. When it comes to also number of building permits to dwelling, again, we see a decline also, and the highest decline is for Greece, Latvia, Portugal, Cyprus. And so again, picture is lines are stable or declining. European society is also becoming more and more homeowner societies. And here we see countries from Central and Eastern Europe where home ownership is almost 90%, for instance, for Romania. And but still there are some countries which have quite large rental market, and here is a leader: Germany, Netherlands, Denmark. But what our study shows that a high home ownership rate is associated with high overcrowding rate, and also with higher housing deprivation. So here is a picture of overcrowding rate in EU countries, and you see a very clear pattern. But countries which have very high home ownership, they also have a higher overcrowding rate, although overcrowding rate is declining in European countries. But still you see a very clear pattern. This is Central and Eastern European countries, and also some South European countries. On other side, we see countries which have higher rental sector, and here we have smaller overcrowding rate. Also, we see also very clear pattern, but countries which have very high home ownership, they also have problems with housing deprivation. And for instance, Romania is a leader when it comes to home ownership. And here you see also that Romania has problems with housing deprivation, also Lithuania, Portugal, and other Central and Eastern European countries, and also some Mediterranean countries, and countries which have very large rental sector, they have less problems with housing deprivation. So to highlight, in countries with higher ownership rate, where affordability of housing is higher, but other housing parameters are worse, like higher overcrowding rate, more problems with physical parameters of the housing, and also better social rights are in countries in which housing is ensured not only by municipalities, but also by other providers, such as non-profit housing associations, cooperatives, and non-profit organizations. And here we see examples of Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, and these countries have larger public or social rental sector. And countries in which social rental sector is small, the government support is mainly concentrated to subject subsidies, support for home buyers, support for renters at a very low income, and maintenance support to cover various utilities for people in vulnerable situation. And here we see examples of Lithuania, Poland, and Spain. So how does welfare state typology reflect in housing policies? Countries, we see what countries differ, converge in many individual indicators, but we also see that still there are clusters of countries which are mainly associated with different welfare state regimes. And this is not surprising because countries have different histories. They have, and housing is very power dependent. That means that previous policy choices in housing affect very much what we have what kind of outcomes we have today. And on the left side, you see the map, countries' distribution according to housing availability and affordability. Here we don't see such a clear pattern, but on the right side, we have a map and countries are distributed according to expenditures, government expenditures, and also social housing stock. And here we see a very clear pattern. We have Central and Eastern Europe in one cluster, also Mediterranean countries, also we see one cluster, and also Northern countries, Nordic countries, and Western Europe also form a similar cluster. So we still have differences, and countries differ geographically, like we see differences south and north, also east and west. So what kind of role EU should take in housing policies? And EU try to influence housing through various charters, reports, and also European Pillar of Social Rights. Try to protect housing rights, such as social housing and housing assistance and services for homelessness. However, and of course, all these measures help to make housing policy a priority on the political agenda. However, our analysis highlights the limited tools available to EU to support housing rights and responsibility for ensuring the right to housing lies primarily with the national states and is usually guaranteed at the local municipalities. So it means that EU has very limited tools to support housing rights. And what the EU could do, it can take leading role in developing comprehensive strategy for securing housing rights at the EU level. However, specific solutions should be tailored to national states because each country has unique housing policies, also problems of housing sector are unique, and local policymakers will know best how to solve these issues and problems in housing policy. But housing is very important for social Europe, and therefore EU should further address housing issues. EU also can take a leading role in harmonizing housing indicators and their collection at the regional level. And this is important in order to learn from the best practices and also look for innovative policy solutions. And I would like to finish my presentation with a few recommendations, modest recommendations. So social or public housing is still very important to ensure housing rights, and housing rights across the EU, if we want to enhance them, it is important to strengthen the public social housing sector, also through partnership with non-profit organizations. So it's not only municipalities should provide social housing, but also through partnership with non-profit organizations. It is important to increase the regulation in rental markets and to enhance the protection of tenants' rights. And tenants' rights are especially weakly protected in some Central and Eastern European countries. And also very important to encourage grassroots initiatives, such as housing associations, cooperatives of housing self-management organizations, and they should be particularly encouraged if we want to strengthen housing rights in Europe. So thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Yolanta. Many thanks also for the final recommendations. Is there any question for the public from which we would like to start the debate? So we had three. I think I hope Maurizio is still. Can we project Maurizio behind us?
Still here.
Okay. So we started from, as I said before, a quite, I would say, a convincing analytical framework in identifying what does it mean social Europe from a citizen's perspective, so from a right-based perspective. And then we deep dive into the instrumental resources and the findings that emerge from the work from the EuSocialCit project, and then we zoom in on one of the area which I think when I was listening to the commission was pointed as one of those missing principles in terms of what has been included in the action plan for the pillar. So in 2025 we will come with an evaluation of the European Pillar of Social Rights action plan, and it's now the time to think about the next action plan. So I think it's we have the analytical lenses to identify what could be done. So maybe the debate we can also try to investigate what would be best to include in the next action plan and what have worked partially in the current action plan. I think the example of the work-life balance directive was quite interesting in that respect.
I'm asking, sorry,
because they're online.
Okay. No, I'm just wondering why you don't take specific examples concerning certain countries, because you must know about it, you made the research, so you know what's going on in certain countries. So why you don't take practical examples saying, okay, in Austria we noticed that, in Belgium we noticed, to make it more attractive, your presentation. Sorry to say so.
Maybe we collect first a couple of questions. Berta?
Thank you. So I actually had a similar thought, but maybe a bit differently phrased. So I would think that there are countries who are both for the instrumental resources bit. So I would think that there are countries who are both willing but unable to implement some of these instrumental resources. And of course, there are countries that are unwilling. And I mean, you can name and shame them if you want. But I was wondering if you could give us an example that you've seen of a country or region that went from being willing and unable to implement something to willing and able.
Then let's take this first through this quite. So what question is, what are the examples?
Of course. Yes, yes. Of course, I could give examples instead of more general statements as I did, but then I would sort of talk for 3 hours probably, then instead of for 15 minutes. I think if you want details, and I can understand that you want details, as I said in the very beginning of today, we have a big pile of reports where you can see the details of our empirical work. And then I would suggest that you go to our homepage of our project, and there's a lot of examples there that you can find. And I sort of refrained from going into that because I thought the general message about having instrumental resources is more important than giving the details of one case or the other case. That would be it's a question of time, basically. And to you, I would give you an example, for example, of Denmark, which was very much against the work-life balance directive and didn't like that. But once it was adopted, it actually switched and became one of the most active implementers of the directive. And very actively started to create instrumental resources to give especially fathers in Denmark information and access to father's leave benefits. that is not exactly what you asked for, but that would be the first example that comes to my mind. You are right that there is, and that is, I think, one of the areas where the EU could actually play a role. There is also a lack of, I think you mentioned two interesting things. Can be a lack of will. We've also seen that in the work on the work-life balance directive, that there are countries that I mentioned which are actually not so interested in developing instrumental resources because they would rather stick to the status quo as it is. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, basically. Oh yeah, there are also countries that are unable. That was your other point. I think there the EU can actually play an important role, and you can see with the social protection recommendation, which, as I mentioned, has an important element on transparency in there. The Commission is now having all these reports produced where researchers show in country X how do they do it exactly, what kind of ways do they find to improve transparency, what kind of instruments do they have. And I think that can at least be element of a sort of a learning strategy in the sense of the open method of coordination type of learning, where countries can learn from each other what you can do. That does not necessarily solve a capacity problem if you have municipalities without resources, but citizens with needs, that is of course still a problem. But I do think we can think about countries that learn from each other for what kind of solutions exist.
May I add one remark on this? It also depends on the relative salience that in national and European Union level discussions, the problem of non-take-up has. Because people who do not take up benefits are typically vulnerable people, quite dispersed, quite poorly organized. And so it's difficult for this challenge to actually gain salience in the public agenda. And there are no, apart from certain very, very contingent and not systematic data collections, we lack comparative and regular data on non-take-up, especially for the big benefits. We don't know much about the situation on the ground. And this is a gap which could be filled by the European Union, collecting data on take-up on a regular basis, maybe use such data during the semester. Now, if there is a social convergence framework, this could be one of the relevant dimensions, because if you bring one problem to the attention of policymakers and to the broader public, you encourage accountability. And the problem that you mentioned, the willingness, I don't see why a government should be unwilling to increase the take-up of benefits unless they have a kind of a perverse strategy of introducing rights and then hoping that citizens do not take them up. Maybe that is the case. But more than unwillingness, I think it is a matter of low salience, of neglect, of a problem that is not brought to the political attention of policymakers, and for which there are no systematic data, and therefore there's no accountability pressure.
Maybe I would like to give the floor to Caroline first and to Brian after, who have been deeply investigating the example, especially on work-life balance, and produced a couple of very nice papers on that. I don't know, Caroline or Brian, who wants to intervene first?
I don't mind, but I can go first. So I'm sorry I can't be there, and it's thanks for hosting the event, Cynthia. Nice to see you, Francesco, and Yolenta and Martin and Maurizio, of course. So on the work-life balance. So this is I've been in charge of investigating this together with my team. So we've looked at 6 different countries. And like Martin mentioned, Denmark is a case in point where there's opposition to the idea of regulating leave, earmarked leave for fathers. And then once the directive is adopted, then the actors, which is not only the government, but also like Maurizio and Martin highlighted, civil society organizations, unions, and employers all mobilize in order to implement this social right comprehensively. If I should mention one, and this is the opposite in Poland, you can read, like Martin mentioned, the papers in the on the EuSocialCit website. I can also send you some of the articles which have been published. Of course, when the EU regulates, there's also room for discretion at member state level to implement the directives differently. So they do have some room of discretion. That said, it's written in the directive that they should implement it with a view to enhance the participation of fathers in leave, which in turn should have a positive impact on the labor market outcomes for women and enable them to have more seamless careers. For different reasons, member states have implemented differently. Sometimes it's not salient, like Maurizio was saying. Sometimes it's perceived to cost too much money. This is the case of France, for example, where parental leave is very weakly remunerated. And in some countries where governments are more center-right, then it's a question of values as well, about the gender division of labor contra more gender equal versus more traditional gender roles. And this is the case in point for the Polish government. So even if there's some civil society organizations that think it's a good idea, even if on paper it looks good, the intention of the policymakers is that it should not be taken up so much by fathers. So of course there is the flexibility. The problem is that when the flexibility is used to implement it differently than what's intended. So in some countries, the intention is a high use, and in others it's not, and that, like Martin mentioned, can possibly undermine the aim of the pillar. So we think that the EU policymakers should be attentive to this point in terms of implementation of social rights in general. And with this example, this is a very good living example of the challenges, which we're likely to see also in forthcoming directives, such as the minimum wage directive, as well as the one on the platform economy. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Caroline. Brian, I actually wrote in front of everyone. Can you intervene?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I also can turn on my video, but it seems to be turned off. So I will just talk and tell you what, just the main point that I want to make. It is answer to the first 2 questions that that what Martin was emphasizing about the patterns of instrumental resources and what we measure, and that the broad findings that he was reporting are capturing the tenor of a lot of different measures that we have gathered and analyses of how those measures play out for various measures of take-up or for social benefit packages or for social benefit spending measures, sort of policy effort measures, and also how they play out for actual outcomes or attitudes about outcomes, for that matter. We've looked at a lot of these issues, and the research project really is really focused on doing this difficult task of just getting good measures. And one of the reasons why Martin was right not to show too many examples, it's not just an issue of time, but just that you get a very different picture of which countries or which kinds of individuals are doing well or doing badly with respect to our conception of instrumental resources, depending on the particular aspect of instrumental resources you look at. For example, if you want to look at the individual level, we have individual data analyses where we look at, for example, education background as a pattern of experience that confers instrumental resources to navigate that social policy maze that you saw in Martin's presentation. And we also measure things like, is somebody a union member? Does somebody have contact with unions? Does somebody have contact with the political system? Do they follow and watch news? Do they understand the economy? These kinds of, in a sense, individual level measures. And you find that they often correlate positively with each other. So the people who are highly educated do follow the news more than those who are less educated. But the more important finding is that the different measures of instrumental resources vary a lot. And the correlations are often quite low, which is for us as people who care about this area, a reason to think that we need to be careful in the way we talk about and measure and report, exactly who's good and who's bad, who's doing well, who's doing less well on social rights instrumental resources. And everything that I was just saying applies also to the national level measures that we have. So Martin mentioned, for instance, information transparency or union representation at the national level. Turns out that the countries that do quite well with respect to that measure of instrumental resources, like a country like Belgium, turn out to do really poorly with respect to a more obvious and direct and boutique measure of instrumental resources that we have put together, namely the existence of, or really the number of, awareness-raising campaigns targeted at social rights access, or the existence of an internet portal that ease internet access for social rights acquisition. That kind of national measure, it's a rough measure, turns out to be completely uncorrelated with labor density, union density. So by that measure, Belgium is the country that scores lowest on these awareness campaigns and internet portals, whereas a country like Finland or Poland are the highest, and they don't necessarily have the highest, particularly Poland, don't have the highest scores with respect to labor representation. Those are just two examples, but it's a reminder that the story is in progress in the sense that we're trying to measure this better. Our reporting of the patterns is premature enough such that now the main message is that these things matter, where we look at them and see what their implications are. They tend to matter pretty consistently in a lot of different ways. But the which countries and which individuals seem to be doing well with respect to a given measure of instrumental resources turns out to be different with respect to another.
Thank you, Brian. Is there any question, Volker?
Thanks. I would like to react a little bit. I think the intervention of Mauricio Ferrara was very interesting, my point of view, because if you're going to the instrumental resources, we will have the case that they're not well integrated into society, with people with a lack of access to certain access points like unions, like social support, like internet, like everything else, are the most deprived from the access to given resources for their need, for their given support. And of course, it would be helpful to have a campaign. Of course, it would be helpful to have something like an internet portal. But as you mentioned before, that's not probably the easiest way to get the most excluded on the board. So I could fully subscribe most of the arguments concerning the three main arguments for instrumental resources, but I miss a little bit the reduction of complexity and perhaps a little bit more paternalistic states. It's not so well seen around this table that the state is probably paternalistic in front of myself. Personally, I detest it, but I can defend myself very, very well. And the people in need probably cannot, or are ashamed, are deprived, and sometimes not very open to support from different people. So there we have surely a lack. If you're looking for instrumental resources, we have certainly a lack to get how we got people on board who are the most excluded. And concerning non-take up in the sense, if you will not go to register data, in surveys, they are highly underrepresented. So we even will not measure them. Thank you. It's more comment, not a question, sorry.
No, it's a needed comment. Any other? Maybe first I go.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Marie Leboeuf from One Policy Place. So talking about the member states and the ones that are the good example, the bad examples, would you agree that countries like Denmark and Sweden that have recognized social models are often against those social protection policies at the EU level, concerned that it would diminish their already existing social system and those laws that are already enshrined so much in their system? And would you say that these two countries that I named would represent would represent a risk to the development of social policy overall in the EU?
That's quite a question.
Maybe we pick up also Chinse's question.
I mean, it's a bit also of a reflection, because we have a lot of discussion, and I want to go to housing. So when we decided to focus on housing as a specific topic for this session, it's because clearly it's not covered or not very well developed in the social pillar, but also we had a sense that this may grow in importance. And the thought I had listening to Yolanda is that many things are changing, and one of the biggest change we are seeing now is that the climate crisis, the increase in the cost of living, and the impact that this may have in access to housing and access to proper housing. Because you may have access to housing, but not being able basically to pay the costs which are associated to housing. So I wonder whether actually these two aspects should be taken into consideration together when we speak about social housing. So not only having a roof, but also being able to be in a proper housing where there is a proper heating system, and it doesn't become so expensive that basically all income goes for paying energy bills. So that's a bit the thinking is to what extent they should be linked, and policies should be taught somehow in a linked way. Thank you.
I also have a question regarding the housing question. You showed this beautiful picture with basically the states going out of this sector, not investing any longer. And coming from Germany, which you can hear also from my accent, I remember the stories of my grandparents where they just said that it wasn't even social housing. You just had a big public sector for this, and this was influencing the rent market heavily. And now we don't have this any longer. One of the biggest political struggles in Germany recently in the last years with heavy mobilization of the citizens was in Berlin just on this course. We have a new government there, and it just took away all the different regulations. So you pushed you showed us this picture on basically the question of ownership, but in your recommendations at the end, ownership and investment by the state is not mentioned, if I'm correct, but basically, okay, we need to support cooperatives, etc. So wouldn't basically the question of the decommodification of this sector be then something we should work for? Thanks.
Francesco?
You want to go first, Maurizio?
No, I just want to suggest a short answer regarding the Nordic countries. And I agree with the lady who raised the question that in the past, the attitude of the Nordic countries was somewhat hostile to both dimensions of social Europe. Number one, supranational regulations in the social domain. Number two, the establishment of cross-national transfers. Now, one of the reasons, or one of the key reasons, is precisely what was mentioned, namely the fear that the intrusion of the European Union in this domain might challenge some of the historical achievements of the Nordic welfare states. And I think that they did experience some challenges, for example, with the famous rulings of the Court of Justice, the Laval Quartet, that seemed to challenge some basic foundations of the industrial relation systems of these countries. However, my impression, which is partly also the result of some research, is that in the last, starting from the second half of the 2010s, there has been a slow change of attitude. You also have to take into account that the UK is no longer in the European Union. And, you know, the UK was a big country that very often orchestrated blocking majorities in those areas where the introduction of social legislation could be adopted via qualified majority voting. So now, let's say that the blocking strength of the Nordic government has diminished, but more importantly, I think that they have learned that their own member state, their own welfare states may become vulnerable if there are, you know, extraordinary contingencies like the pandemic and the ensuing economic challenges, or the challenge of the green transition. And that therefore, the more activism on the side of the EU might not result in challenging past achievements, but may actually result in strengthening the capacity of their domestic welfare state to face some of the new risks. And this, I think, explains this, let's say, the weakening of the opposition to both dimensions of European solidarity, you know, supranational regulation and cross-national solidarity.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your questions. Maybe I would like to clarify what in my presentation I emphasized that the commodification of housing sector, especially focusing on expansion of social and public housing. However, home ownership could be also quite decommodifying because if it is without mortgage loan. There should be a balance between both tenures, private and also public. And in this case, we can better ensure social rights. And also private rental sector is also very important for ensuring social rights. And we have also German case where private rental sector is dominated, but also regulated by the state. So I think it is important to have a balance between tenures, and if we look into a case, for instance, Central and Eastern Europe, and also Lithuania, we see what the move is too much into one direction when home ownership is 90% and social housing is only 2%. So then we have really very dualistic housing system, and social housing is stigmatized, and a problem also with housing deprivation, And quite recently, there was issued a report, OECD report on housing availability and affordability in Lithuania. And they really were concerned about increasing home ownership in Lithuania. And the problem is also that, for instance, older people, they are trapped in during Soviet time produced flats, and they cannot sell them. But energy efficiency is very low in these flats, and they have to pay very high price for the energy. And given the situation that pension is quite low in Lithuania, so this becoming a problem. So housing shouldn't be a prison, but housing should be a place from which you can move also. So it should be dynamic. And also then there is a very, very high home ownership. This is also not good for labor mobility, because then again, families or individuals, they are attached to their homes, and there is a situation when, for instance, cities expanding, but regions becoming empty. So I am emphasized what is important to expand social and public housing, because we see examples of countries like Denmark, Netherlands, positive examples where the housing markets are more dynamic, and also when private rental and public rental sectors both dominate. They also compete for a better price, and then you can see reduced price reduction also for rental markets, but also for price reduction for houses which we want to buy. So I don't know, I hope I reflected on your question. And then Cynthia's question, yes, also probably it was not clear from my presentation, but we examined not only affordability, that means that whether European citizens can afford to buy a house, but also adequacy. So housing should be certain, should have certain qualities like safety, protection. Housing should be warm. It should be enough space for everybody in a house, and also it should be a secure neighborhood and other very important parameters of a housing. So we also looked into housing adequacy, not only housing affordability and availability, and of course both of them are very important. But the conclusion is that countries which have higher rental sector, they have also better parameters, also housing quality. So, and what I also emphasized, that countries we have very high home ownership, we have problems with housing quality. And also, as I told, housing markets are not so dynamic, and people are trapped in their houses.
One last reflection on your reflection, because as if I understand you right, what you were saying is basically to have whatever enter the system that cannot connect, that cannot get their rights, right? And you're right in that. At the same time, as I emphasized, instrumental resources can also have an active role, and not only providing instruments, but also having an outreach quality. And I think there, for public authorities, also for NGOs or other civil society organizations, there is a role to go to the people that you point to get them into the system and to get them their access to the benefits that they are entitled to.
So many thanks to Martin, Maurizio, Jolanta, and we have a 12 minutes break, and then the next section starts at 16:45, and the coffee break is downstairs.
can we please close the door and we start? Sorry, can I have your attention and be silent? Thank you. It's like at school. And my professor was doing that was the way to call for silence. So let's start this panel. I'm extremely pleased to open this policy panel, which concludes the event of today. As I announced earlier, we have an excellent panel of speakers. They are the policymakers. So I think it's a great opportunity to hear from them where we stand when it comes to social rights, and more in particular, the European Pillar of Social Rights. This was the main theme of the discussion today. We heard that the Commission, what has been achieved during the last 4 years, the main measures which have been implemented, the measures that are in the pipeline, but also what is not being fully addressed, and the fact that while the European Pillar of Social Rights is basically the European compass, that's the way it was defined, of social policies, a lot needs to be done in terms of implementation. So this, I think, will be the main point of the discussion, and for this, let me introduce the panelists. So Frank van den Broek. Frank is the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Social Affairs and Health here in Belgium. To my left, Agnes Jongerius. She is member of the European Parliament. And last but not least, Oliver Robke. He is the President, quite new President of the European Economic and Social Committee. I think it's also quite interesting to see that we will have 3 different perspectives. So a member state, European Parliament, Economic and Social Committee. So I would like to start basically by getting an overview of how the different institutions that they represent are actually looking at the European Pillar of Social Rights. And I would like to start with Frank. So Frank, Belgium will have the presidency of the Council starting in January 2024. You are preparing the presidency. This has been quite a lot of work. We are fully aware of this. And in the main document, you defined the pillar as the manifesto, the guiding manifesto. What do you mean by that?
Thank you, Cynthia. There's basically 2 reasons why the Pillar of Social Rights is key to us. But let me say, first of all, that our Belgian presidency of the Council comes obviously at a critical juncture. We'll have to wrap up a number of files, sometimes rather complicated technically, politically, like the regulation coordination that will be unfinished, I'm afraid, platform work. So there's a number of, you have to wrap up. This is the end of a legislature, but also it's the beginning of a new legislature. And so our ambition is to really contribute to setting the strategic agenda of the EU in the social domain for the next 5 years, which is something that is built in political processes in the Union through what the Council does in terms of its strategic agenda definition, what the Commission President, the new Commission President will do when the briefs are defined for the commissioners. So we will have a new strategic agenda for 5 years in the second half of 2024, and we would really like to prepare that. So you should understand our endeavor in that context. Now, why this very, very strong emphasis on the European Pillar of Social Rights? The first reason is that the pillar, I think, has been a very productive initiative. We've seen important spin-offs, yet it's unfinished. I'll give a few examples immediately. And given that it's unfinished, we should continue work on it. I'll give a few examples immediately. But next, the pillar indeed in its gestalt, in its coherence, as a comprehensive approach to social rights in the EU, should stay indeed also in that specific role, in that capacity. And we would like, I'll come to that maybe in the second half of the discussion, but we would like really, building on the pillar of social rights, we would really like to make a further step in entrenching social policy objectives and concerns into the hard economic and fiscal policies of the Union. And therefore, you also need the pillar, and you need its gestalt, you need its coherence, its overall approach. Let me first say something on my first argument, unfinished business. Just one example. Some people in the room may know that I've always thought that the principle number 12 of the pillar, access to social protection, is a very strong, politically salient principle. It basically says everyone in the Union who's in work, in whatever activity, sector, status, whatever nationality, if you are a European citizen, if you're working in Europe, you should have access to an adequate set of adequate social rights. That's a very strong principle. It's key also to the stabilization capacity and the protective capacity of our social systems. Now, there's been a recommendation on that principle that has set in motion a process of reporting on national action plans on access to social protection. The result of that, there's been a synthesis by the Commission, which has been discussed. The result is a bit of a mixed bag, I should say. What you see is that in many member states, there are still important lacunae in access to social protection. You see actions, you see initiatives, a bit disparate. I kind of lacked a bit an overall analysis of the lacunae and a bit of an overall strategy. And the main risk now is that having this mixed bag in our hands, that the process will simply stop. And that's a big risk. So we would like to have a new iteration of a process on that recommendation on access to social protection. We are not yet decided on how exactly we would set the focus. It might link in a sense with the final words of Maarten Keunen in the previous panel, which was about the reality of outreaching and access. That might be a topic. The transparency of social rights. We could have other topics, so we're still pondering that. But anyway, a new iteration of the process on access to social protection for us is pretty important. Let me give a second example, then I'll stop here given the time. An important spin-off of the pillar, and this was a spin-off of the pillar, was the European Labour Authority. We think it can be reinforced. It so happens that there will be an evaluation of the European Labour Authority that is planned. And so we have a number of topical ideas how you can reinforce the European Labour Authority, but we would like to start from that evaluation. And for us, that is also part of the pillar story. This is about implementing in terms of your control and your inspection apparatuses, rights enshrined in the pillar. I could elaborate on that, but maybe I should stop here. But so the pillar, we would like to have continuity there. Often politicians have this tendency of getting tired of what's been repeated too often. They want something new. Here I would say, no, stick to this. It's not fully exploited yet. Stick to it. Because it's unfinished and because it's important. And that's a fight we will have. But secondly, but I might come back to that later in the panel, I think the pillar could also be very important as a kind of an overall concept when you try to make further steps in linking the social with the economic. To be very practical, and then I'll stop, Cynthia, we plan a big high-level conference on the pillar, 14-15 April 2024, a very big conference. We would like to see that conference end with a formal declaration on the future of the pillar, ideally by many different, not just the member states, but also other institutional actors. So we would like to see a formal declaration on the importance of the pillar on the basis of a, I hope, an interesting high-level conference. But then I already agreed with my colleague, Minister of Finance, Vincent van Petegem in this country. I agreed that in June, we would organize a jumbo council of the ECFIN ministers and the EBSCO ministers together. And that is very important. Now, I don't want a jumbo council just to have a big event. That jumbo council should indeed focus on how do we exactly, in a very tangible way and in a realistic way, entrench the social into the economic and vice versa. How do we do that? There, the pillar is important, but there is more to it than the pillar. But we can come back to that later.
Many thanks, Frank. I think your view is very clear, and I want to come back to this point in a moment. I would like now to move to Agnes. So, in May, the EP agreed on this roadmap towards social Europe. What is in there? Is this aligned to what Frank just said, that we need to stick to the pillar, or there is a search for novelty?
I was thinking we had this the Netherlands once said why our previous Prime Minister Balkenende should leave. And he used the argument we all every now and then want to have a new summer dress. So I don't disagree with Balkenende, but every now and then we need a new summer dress. Which I found quite funny, I must say, as a way of changing your own political leader. I'm not going to ditch the European pillar because I think indeed it's in a way a perfect description of what a decent life for people in Europe should contain. In 20 clear principles, it is all in there. I have this book in my handbag all of the time because it's useful to then go back to what we have put, because I see this as a promise to European citizens. Why we did wrote this resolution in a way for the preparation of the social forum important because I think it should be we should have a voice on behalf of the European Parliament if we go to such a forum. What are our expectations? And to be clear, yes, we were happy with the social pillar. We were very happy with the Porto social forum 2 years ago, because then there was finally an action plan on the social pillar. I think we also brought that the 3 targets which were agreed upon 2 years ago in Porto didn't do the trick. Either on poverty or on employment, also because just a number of employment is just a number. It doesn't say anything on quality employment. The target about skilling of workers, we all know from our own experience and from studies that's let's say if you're talking about lifelong learning, the main emphasis is on those people who have already a quite good educational level. So it doesn't work out for all the Europeans. I would say I didn't like the idea of the Portuguese government to say it wasn't a one-off in Porto, and we're going to organize this forum, and we're going to organize it every 2 years. And then we thought then it's also good that the Parliament every 2 years makes up their, let's say, their minds on what have we reached and what are we still expecting. Indeed, one of the things we did in the meantime between 2 years ago in Porto and May was a conclusion on the minimum wage directive, and there we set a quite clear target, not only on adequacy of minimum wage levels, but also on the number of people we think should be covered under collective agreements in all the member states. And I think with the social pillar in your hands, you can say it's clear that if we say 80% is our target, then we should put our money where the law is. So if we are handing out public money, we should have some conditions attached to this public money. And that's a way of, let's say, combining the European pillar and the results from the European pillar with other fields policy making. The second example is around, for instance, pillar number 20, which is about access to good food services. I think with the oil rise of energy prices, with the people now saying what are put in the near future, there is quite a lot of reasons to look into this pillar and see how we can work on, for instance, the directive of services of general economic interest. So that's also a combination, and I must say I'm also very happy with the combination Frank has been making around economic governance and the social pillar. So I think the pillar itself is a good booklet. The targets should be reconsidered because they didn't do the trick in the last 2 years. But from the policy side, we need to also be convincing all the other policy makers that there is this European pillar, that it is a promise for a decent life for Europeans. That if we want to make this a reality, we have to indeed put our money where the law is, and put our policies where the principles are. And I think the booklet is very useful for that.
Thank you very much. So also in this case, the message was really very clear, and I see we are converging towards a broader question. But before that, I would like to move to Oliver. So the committee, the Economic and Social Committee, is very much involved in promoting the role of civil society. We spoke about implementation and the limits in the implementation of the pillar of social rights. Do you see a role for civil society in actually supporting the implementation of the pillar?
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. As you rightly pointed out, the ESC does not only claim that we are the voice of civil society, but we are representatives of civil society across Europe. So we bring together not only social partners, but also civil society organizations. I think this is also the added value, because we are dealing with social dialogue, but also with civic dialogue. And here I see an added value when it comes, for example, to exploratory opinions, where we show some possible avenues, and where our opinions go beyond the position of the social partners. Because if we just echo the social partners, then I think the added value would be limited. But we try to find consensus, which not always works, but in most of the cases we have big majorities in our opinion. And I think it comes to the social pillar, and we can see that civil society, the ESC, has been involved from the very beginning on. Before the pillar was proclaimed, we reached out to all member states, to national debates with stakeholders. We brought them together, and we offered actually also our input from ESC forward. And it was always in favor of a strong social pillar and in favor of more social convergence. And this was not only at the beginning of the pillar, but I would say in all the steps afterwards, when it came to the proclamation of the pillar, we issued opinion, and then also just before 3 years ago, just before the social summit, we also adopted a resolution. And if I looked at here, maybe also an answer to your question, if I looked into the action plan, then I would say, even if we are always modest, but I think there are some points where we could also claim some ownership as committee. And for example, when it comes to the question of more participation rights, but we are participatory committee, and of course we are in favor of participation of all stakeholders, also of local participation in the economic and in the corporate governance. And if you look into the action plan, there is a small, but there is a sentence that regulates local participation, more local participation. So I think it shows that we have some ideas that we can contribute. And I would say, in the end, I'm really grateful that Agnes brought together, because with Agnes, we work also together, and with Dennis here, we have the opportunity to issue exploratory opinions when the Parliament asks us for it. We can here push forward more ideas that are ideas of the whole civil society community, the social partners, and NGOs and other civil society organizations. Another I think, good example is just the cooperation with the upcoming Spanish presidency. Spanish presidency asked us for 21 initiatives. So we call it exploratory opinions, the technical work, but actually joint initiatives where the upcoming Spanish presidency asked the committee for our ideas on topics like green collective farming, or the question of precarious work and mental health, social progress, a very crucial demand of the trade union. So we have adopted not all, but almost all of those opinions already. And we look forward really to contribute now to the implementation with our opinions, because they are not only opinions, I would say, for the record, but those opinions will be followed up. This is also the promise from the Spanish presidency during the presidency in some meetings and conferences, and I think the committee can play here an important role. Last point I wanted to make, I very much support the idea to make a link between the social pillar and, let's say, the economic governance. I think this is crucial. And I would like to make another one. So we said, well, some people argue, well, most of the ideas of the action plan have been tabled already, so what is now the reason to follow up further on the social pillar? I think there are good reasons. There's another reason. This is for me, and also the core of my key priority, is to look a bit beyond our own borders, to look also at candidate countries. I was very much delighted when I was at the Corporate Social Forum, the lunch debate of the ministers, that more and more ministers from enlargement countries, from candidate countries, are involved. They can see that there's a willingness on their side to use European standards and also European pillar of social rights as a reference for themselves. I think this should be supported by us. So we, as committee, and that is my ambition, we will try to push for this and to integrate also representatives, trade unions, employers, but also other civil society representatives in our daily work, that they can also have a say on the implementation of the pillar, that they can make proposals, because what we have seen, that we are largely also with the Commission in recent enlargement rounds, that we are not proactive enough to strengthen structures, social structures, but also structures of civil society organizations. And here I see really key task for our committee to help with this, help in candidate countries, and what I see, the reactions are very enthusiastic. So there is a lot of willingness on their side, not only to adapt it to prepare for the single market, but also for ambitious European social standards. And this will be definitely supported by our committee.
Thank you very much for this also update and what will be coming. Frank, I'm coming back to you. You already anticipated a bit the direction we will go, and this idea basically of making a link between the pillar and the economic governance. Now, if I understand correctly, a few days ago at the EBSCO, actually there was quite a majority supporting this idea of integrating the social convergence framework, what was the social imbalance procedure was the old name, into the European semester. Why do you think this is important, and what consequences, what in practice, what would it mean for member states?
Yes, thank you. Let me first also congratulate Oliver for his position now. And it so happens that indeed we've already asked, in view of our 2024 presidency, for 3 opinions by the ESC, one of which is specifically on the pillar. So I think we will be able to work together in the spirit which you sketch in an excellent way. Now, on the social convergence framework, so that is a process which has been studied in a large working group of member states on the basis of a kind of a virtual pilot. So there's been a lot of preparatory work. And indeed, we wanted, together with some other countries, notably Spain, with whom we launched this in a sense, we wanted this to be formally endorsed by the EPSCO Council this month. And indeed, that so happened with a qualified majority. I should say, to be realistic, that also means that those who did not support this proposal, those who voted against, they could obviously say we would like to opt out of it, which is not something I would like to see. So there is further work to be done politically. Now on the essence. First of all, you also already mentioned it. A very, very long time ago, I published a paper in which title there was something about excessive social imbalances, which was playing with the word imbalances, like macroeconomic imbalances, a bit a play of words, but there was also an idea behind it, which was that a country can be a bit in a vicious circle of a social imbalance, which in the end may also have a negative impact on its productive potential, its overall economic fabric. And so this idea that you can have also a social imbalance, which you should identify in the realm of the social, was important. Now, I should also say that I was a bit skeptic, maybe some people in the room know this, but a bit skeptic about, okay, that's a good analytical idea, but can we put that into policy? We were able to do that. The name changed because a number of colleagues did want to make it very clear that there was a positive goal. And indeed, there is a positive goal because the vicious circle means divergence. The positive goal is social convergence. And so we said, okay, it's a social convergence framework. And we also told colleagues that this would not interfere with, for instance, the macroeconomic imbalances procedure. This would not diminish in any way other procedures, but just add something. What does it add? You might say, okay, that is the end process, and indeed it's a process. However, what does it add? No new indicators, just using the existing battery of indicators to refine and sharpen the analysis of social performance at the level of EMCO, just sharpening the analysis, but also making it possible that the Commission would say, indeed, we identify in some countries, in some member states, we identify something which is really problematic in terms of upward social convergence. And we go deeper into the analysis, triggered by a good use of existing indicators. That would be important per se. But there is also a link between that discussion and indeed the broader new economic governance discussion. Let me say one thing on that, because there's kind of a natural link here. You have that discussion, some people in the room know that better even than I do, you have that discussion on the new economic governance, the new fiscal rules. And to be fair, if you take the latest proposals by the Commission and you apply it to, say, a country like Belgium, it's pretty tough. Maybe with reason. We have a problem of fiscal consolidation before us. It's pretty tough. But the same proposal says, okay, you can, in a sense, buy some flexibility in your fiscal consolidation on conditions, like reform, credible time path, blah, blah, blah. There's a reference to the Pillar of Social Rights there in the actual text on that flexibility. But then you must make that operational in a way that can also create trust. How to do that? The social convergence framework can be part of the story because it would allow to deepen the analysis where the social goes wrong. and you might be in vicious circles that create imbalances first. And that would feed into recommendations to countries. So that's one part of the story, and recommendations as part of the semester. But the other part of the story is something we would like to add. When I say we, it's my excellent Spanish colleague, José Luis Escriva, who is responsible for social inclusion and pensions, who has a bit of a background as a banker, so he's a man in data and figures and analysis. Very interesting. And he says, what we should do if we would like to make that idea that, yes, fiscal consolidation, you can discuss the time power of fiscal consolidation also in view of reforms, also in the social domain, but then you should allow the Commission to really get a grip on the evaluation of social policies. And that evaluation should be, in José Luis's and my view, it should be indeed in terms of the return on social policy. Now, I know that this is a difficult discussion. It's not so easy to identify a return on policy. But what we would like to do is to dig deeper into that idea. Can we identify positive return on intelligent social policy and social reform at the micro level of very specific programs? Maybe at a more macro level of your overall, let's say, approach to, say, education or childcare and what that means in terms of productive capacity in the longer term. Can you do that in a credible evidence-based way? And on that basis, by micro-level analysis, by meso, by macro-level analysis, can you give substance to the idea that indeed well-organized social policy and social policy reform can be important in terms of longer-term fiscal consolidation and productive capacity, and thus also play a role in how you define the let's say, what member states have to do under the new economic governance rules. That is the idea. And that is exactly what I would like to table at this jumbo council meeting in June 2024 with the ECFIN and the EBSCO ministers. I think we should look at this. We are preparing this. Just thinking about how do you do that. And so the social convergence framework is part of that story, because it should then, the social convergence framework, potentially deeper analysis of imbalances in certain countries and challenges to convergence, that could feed into council recommendations. And if you can add to that a framework that allows you to build trust in a debate whereby you say, okay, the social plays a role also in the economic, and the economic should take that on board and also respect that. Then I think we could really make a step forward. And again, that's the reason why in the first round I said, you need a pillar, obviously, as a kind of a basic inspiration here. You need that as a compass, also in that kind of exercise. So we are not done with it, but we're working also informally with the Commission, with DG Ampli, we are working with them to make that second idea that adds to the social convergence framework more concrete.
Thank you very much, Frank, for sharing this idea and explaining it in a very clear way. I've been working quite a bit on economic governance, so I was extremely interested in listening to you. Maybe one reaction when, I mean, I have been looking quite a bit of macroeconomic imbalance procedure, and for me it was completely useless. So that's, okay, maybe a blunt, but there is a but. There is a but. The point is that it was framed in a way whereby you have the indicators, and the Commission didn't have basically any power to push the countries to reduce the imbalances. So the second step that you described is actually crucial, and what can make the difference? Because otherwise you end up having a nice scoreboard of indicators, so some broad country-specific recommendations saying you should do something in this area in social protection or not very different from what you would have, so just a reference to the specific scoreboard. But your second point and saying, look, that there is another element whereby it is actually in the interest of the member states in putting forward certain policy measures in certain areas of investment, because this is social investment which has some sort of return that can be used to shape the adjustment path that you define for that sustainability. I think that is really the crucial point. And I also like your emphasis in trying to have evidence-based elements that you can bring to the Commission and also to the peers, because the economic governance is also something where the peers and the approval somehow of the peers is important. So maybe I go back to you, Agnes. I don't know whether you want to react to this point.
I think it's clear that next to trying to wrap up a few of the legislative works which are on the table at the moment, like the platform directive is, I think, a very big one. The debate also in the European Parliament about the economic governance will take quite a lot of our time and energy. And I must say, I'm very much in favor of the initiative Frank is describing. I only do hope that it's not too late, because in a way there is, let's say, at least an attempt to say we have to have these new fiscal rules in place before the end of the year, because the exemption period ends formally at the 1st of January, although you also hear now voices of people who say it cannot be done anymore, but then what will be the rules in 2024? I think it's indeed about this jigsaw we have to lay down, where it's, I think, a big win that the social pillar has already been mentioned in the original proposals. But we need to see how can we give it a bite, because the European Pillar of Social Rights by itself, mentioning it by itself, is not enough. So we are now indeed using these weeks before the summer to see if we can come up for proposals amending the regulation, where we say we want to have clarity that, for instance, on a certain number of these 20 principles, there is, regardless of what's the outcome of the fiscal rules, progress instead of regress. Because if indeed this is the promise to Europeans, it should also, in a way, work as a kind of a shield protecting people against cuts in, I think, very important social policies. And we are not there yet, so we are looking with great interest to all the thinking around this topic. And indeed, that's also clear, it will be quite a lot of debates, difficult debates, also in the European Parliament, and see how we can reach consensus around the new fiscal rules, because in general, the European Parliament is not progressive. So if you want to build a progressive majority, you will have to be, I think, quite creative. Yeah. But the mentioning of the European pillar is helpful in that. And also in that sense, we should not come up with something new, but just keep pushing for the European pillar of social rights, because it is, in a way, it's now a known, in policy making, a known instrument.
Yeah, maybe just a quick follow-up. I mean, you have been mentioning basically how to, where to put the money. So to put the money where there is the law, to make it actually concrete. I mean, one element which is on the debate now for quite some time is the minimum income. Do you think this is something that it will go through or will take a long time before?
And here, I do remember when we start pushing for the minimum wage and adequate minimum wages, also people were saying this cannot be done. This is not in line with the treaties. There is no majority for that. You cannot do this. And I must say, but perhaps Oliver can also explain this a little bit. From the employer side, we didn't get any support at all, only hindrance. And now it are the same people who say minimum adequate minimum income cannot be done, not in line with the treaties, should not be done. So I think for me, if you say something cannot be done, I think, okay, let's have a fight about this, because you cannot, on the one hand, set targets around poverty reduction, is I think, very important, and are not willing to consider a same kind of a directive we had around minimum wage, because we also don't describe the minimum wage from the European level. We just say every member state should assess whether or not the minimum wage in his or her country is adequate. And then you have some, let's say, ways to measure what is an adequate minimum wage. The same can be done around minimum income. Let member states assess whether or not people can have a decent life, even if they are not able to contribute to the labor market. So I think it can be done. It cannot be done in this mandate anymore. I think we are busy enough with wrapping up all the files which are on the table. But for me, preparing to the next elections, it's absolutely in my top 3 topics for the next election campaign.
Thanks a lot. I'm now going back to Oliver. I mean, of course, if you want to react on the debate on the governance, feel free. But maybe I want to also have your views on a specific principle of the pillar, which is social dialogue. You mentioned it earlier on. You also come from the trade unions. I mean, seen from outside, it doesn't seem the more dynamic element of the pillar, but this may be a wrong view. I would like to hear the way you are looking at it.
Yes, I will reply to this, but if you allow just a few comments to the points that were discussed before. First, I would also like to congratulate for this idea or for this concept that the Spanish government for the social embalance procedure. I think to put such a mechanism in place to detect social imbalances at the European level, not only for my personal view, a very good and necessary idea, the whole committee actually is also in opinion that we support the idea. I think such a mechanism could rely very much on social partners and also society organizations and could be then embedded in the European semester. So I think this is could be an excellent initiative. The second point just mentioned by Agnes, we had all our experiences in the minimum wage directive also in our committee. We had one of the few cases where we had a counter opinion from the employer, so we couldn't agree on this. The minimum income was a bit easier. This was an implementation. But I think when you say this would be also one of your key priorities for the next Monday, I would say we should also look in a bit closer in, let's say, building minimum requirements at European level, also in the field of social protection or in the field of unemployment insurance. We argued a few years ago for minimum standards for the national unemployment insurance. I know this is very difficult and very sensitive issue because the systems are very different for countries. But actually, our assessment was that the standards are so different for member duration period. So we got to the reputation rate. So we thought it would be time also to look at this, like for more conversion, social upper conversion here. I think this would also be an idea. Maybe a regular approach. I know we won't have any binding rules here at the very beginning, but we could look into this. We could start with, let's say, non-binding measures and at least to start this procedure and to have more upward conversion, because I think we cannot allow that we have not only first and second class workers, but also first and second class underdogs in the different countries. So this would be also, and I say this also not only in my personal view. We have an opinion, and I remember it very well because I was around 10 years ago. So I'm quite familiar with this concept, and we hope that this will be picked up by one of the upcoming presidents. So coming back to your question, I think social dialogue is well enshrined in the social pillar and also in the action plan. And I think it is, there's no doubt about this, it is the integral part of our European social model and also the EU model. And when you say, I don't know what you said exactly, but you said there were maybe lack of results. And
Not very dynamic.
Okay. I think we have to make a distinction between the situation at European level and also in member states. And I think in member states we have still very good results in different member states. And I hope very much that this mechanism can really give new impetus. I myself, I traveled some months ago to Romania, and I could see that at the very beginning, just after the adoption of this directive, social partners together with government look already into possibilities of how to really collective bargaining, collective bargaining is part of social dialogue. So I think there is a good chance, to have a, I would say, any source of social dialogue, because I think this is not only necessary in order to create good and reliable solutions, but I think it's also the key component of our democracy. So therefore, I don't see it so negative, but we need stronger structures. And what I said before, you understand not only in Central Eastern Europe, but especially there, we have a lack of structure, and the structures are not strong enough. Therefore, once again, we shouldn't make the same mistake again. We have to look into the development countries now to build up the structure, into the trust of the people in parliament, and also to put some, I would say, some commitment to delegate power to social partners. Because in countries, I'm just coming from Austria, from the Congress of the EGB, that we don't have the legislation on social dialogue. It's not necessary because it's a culture of decades there. In other countries, you don't have it. So there may be tailoring solution, but I think it will contribute to the stability of our societies, and especially into the transition, the green transition, the digital transition, and I think it's also highlighted in the parliament when it comes to platform work, social dialogue, and the involvement of social partners in the team. And since I represent the ESC, I have to say social dialogue, yes, but also civil dialogue. We shouldn't mix it, but both are of equal importance. And when it comes to the question of streaming states or civil society organizations in some, not only outside the EU, but also inside the EU, then we know that those such as streaming space will have immediate impact also on social partners. So I think fight for freedom and for strong civil society organizations needs also a strong and independent social partners present.
Thank you very much. We have now about 10 minutes, and I would like to open the floor for questions. Please raise your hand. Alexandre?
Hi, so thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. Maybe just a simple one. I think it was mentioned about this concept of return to social policy. Maybe what is the return to a social policy now? And if you think that it's monetary, isn't this opening up for issues in the sense that a social policy will cost and will benefit maybe in the long term. No? So I don't know about if it's possible to expand a bit on this concept.
Any other question? Maybe I collect a couple and then...
Michael Freitag, work Europe and also the employment industry, so part for temporary agency work. I would like to question the balance between regulation and social dialogue, because we see for temporary agency work that there is a strong practice of collective bargaining and social dialogue in Germany, in Netherlands, in other countries to have extra benefits, and we just published a paper on the extra benefits and social protection for agency workers. So my question would be to Agnes Jongerius, especially because you mentioned agency work in the resolution together with your other co-rapporteurs and the MEPs, that you would like the Commission to look at the directive on temporary agency work. What would be your view on what needs to be changed? And can we have a balance between more open-ended contracts, which you see in Germany, in France, Netherlands, and more freedom for partners to regulate pay?
Any other question? Otherwise, maybe we... Frank, on the social investment.
Yes, thank you for the question. Can I maybe first say, Cynthia, that your comment on my intervention was very interesting, so I should come back and discuss it with you. Maybe you should discuss it with Francesco. Let me simply say, before coming to your point, but it follows up. My idea is not, but we are still thinking about this. My idea is not, certainly not that here you have a set of indicators on social performance, and then that set of indicators that kind of automatically triggers a certain policy which you want to see implemented. That's too simple, that will never work, that will not be accepted. There is an important intermediary step, that is a set of indicators can trigger a more in-depth analysis by the Commission of specific social problems and challenges in countries, and that in itself feeds into policy recommendations, etc. So that it's much more nuanced. And I would not like to start making comparisons with the macroeconomic imbalances procedure, although my initial paper and the title was a kind of playing with that word. There is let me make some publicity for my former university. David Bokhorst of the University of Amsterdam did an excellent PhD on the macroeconomic imbalances procedure with a very nuanced kind of assessment. But for me, the take-home message was you should first think clearly about what you expect from that. You should reset first what do you expect from it, and if you have that clear in your mind, then you can make an assessment. And so here my expectation of, let's say, a procedure on social convergence is not something technocratic automatically feeding into recommendations. It's just triggering deeper analyses, and it's not a self-standing thing. That's one. Secondly, then on this question of social investment, yes, we could talk for hours on that. So I'll do it kind of staccato. First, I do not think, it's not my creed, it's not my paradigm, that social policy is only worthwhile if there is a return which you can measure in terms of, say, production, productive capacity, fiscal return. That is not my point. I think social policy can be worthwhile per se, period, because of its social objectives. So I do not want to enter into a very reductionist view of social policy. That's not the point. Secondly, I do not think it's easy to conceive of social policy in terms of investment and capital and stock of capital and then return on that stock of capital. That's more of a metaphor than something you can easily apply. And so I know that because we've been working on that with a number of people. I think about Brian Bergoen, who may still be in the audience, I don't know, Anton Hemerijk and many other people have been working on this. It's pretty complicated. So what we should, the basic insight that I nevertheless would like to table with the ECFIN ministers is that a well-organized social policy can indeed contribute to economic performance. It can do that. It's not the only reason why you should pursue social, but it can do that. How can you then make that operational? Here, I think there are different methodologies. One is on a macro level. You can identify certain domains if you develop them well, and indeed, say early childhood education and care, that's a well-known and maybe too easy example. But if you have a well-developed early childhood education and care system, in good interaction with active labor market policies, my friend Anton was talking to me about that yesterday. If you have it in good interaction with ALMMP, that's simply good for your employment and productive capacity and for a number of welfare outcomes also. That's kind of a correlation. It's not return on investment which you measure, but it's a kind of an important correlation that is sufficiently robust to say, well, a country that kind of catches up with a deficit in that domain might say, I want to buy time in terms of fiscal consolidation because I'm now doing something I have to do and it will have a return in a metaphorical sense. I know there is a robust correlation between what I do in general and my future productive and fiscal capacity. The other approach is what my Spanish colleague is mainly thinking about, is more micro. You can look at specific programs. You could take what the Portuguese did with childcare, a very specific program. Or what was happening in Spain with a number of specific social programs, very micro level. You look at it and you develop an evaluation scheme in which indeed you look at the return in terms of what are the societal and economic side effects on a micro level. My Spanish colleague's argument is that if you would be able to do that, that would be trust building. You could say to the ECFIN ministers, look, my country we want to buy some time in terms of fiscal consolidation, but we are using that time to implement certain policies, and we will give you a number of examples, and we are ready to have them evaluated, stepwise, incrementally. We are ready to do that. You may look critically at them. We have an evaluation scheme for that. Is that measuring return on investment? No, not in a literal sense. I think that's too difficult. Is that a comprehensive answer to the issue at hand? No. But it could be part of the way we try to link, let's say, economic concerns, objectives, with social concerns and objectives by looking at the micro level evaluation of social schemes. So it's in a sense pragmatic. We have learned some lessons about the difficulty of measuring social investment, etc. So it's pragmatic in a sense, but still, I think it's doable. And if you would have that on the table, when you sit together as ministers of social affairs and employment with ministers of economics and finance, you might find some common ground there.
Thanks a lot, Frank, for the explanation. Agnes, there was a question for you.
I'm afraid I didn't get it.
What was the directive? There was temporary agency workers.
Equal pay and social dialogue.
Okay. They directed for temporary agency work. In our opinion, and I'm not only talking about me as a member of the parliament, but the parliament as a whole, has pleaded for a revision of this directive, just because we know that although in the last mandate we were able to redesign the posting of workers director, you now see that the temporary agency directive is being used to create new loopholes for unfair treatment of labor migrants. It was one of the conclusions of the Porto social summit, yes, 2 years ago, and there the Commission has promised to bring an evaluation to the table about this directive, but in total honesty, this has not yet. Perhaps we can, because the evaluation of the ELA is also happening at the moment, and I think you can also see if there are unfair practices in my country, in Germany, in Belgium, with labor migrants from Central and Eastern Europe, and now also from outside of the European Union, more often than not, a temporary agency is involved. And because the ELA has the task for looking into fair labor mobility, perhaps we can combine both debates around and the temporary agency directive and the new mandate of the ELA. And that will be something which has to happen also around Belgian presidency around next year.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to close. I understand some of our speakers have to go. Thank you very much, really, for your participation, for your inputs. It's been really a pleasure and a very interesting discussion. This panel also closes the event. So I hope that you could enjoy the messages that came out from our research. Please go on the website of EuSocialCit. You will find a long list of papers with a lot of ideas, and more has to come. Many thanks, and have a good evening. By the way, there are some drinks and some food in the same room where there was the coffee break. You're very welcome to stay with us. Thank you very much.